The rain came down on the northern woods like a debt being collected, and Wren Hartley stood in the middle of it with a leaking basket of honeycomb, watching an enormous black wolf plant himself between her and the storm. He did it deliberately. He turned broadside to the wind, all 7 feet of him from nose to tail, and the rain that should have soaked her collar drummed against his shoulder instead, running off his fur in silver ropes while she stayed almost dry in the shelter of his body. What Wren did not know, what she could not have guessed, was that the wolf shielding her from the rain was Alaric Thornmore, Alpha King of the 6 Packs, the man whose signature could empty a village, and that at this exact moment the most powerful shifter on the continent was thinking very firmly, "This means nothing. The rain is simply cold," Alaric told himself, as the Omega girl laughed and wrung out her braid an inch from his ribs. "She is simply small, and the storm is simply large, and any wolf would do this. This is a weather problem. I blame the sky." He had come to the border woods to inspect the eastern watchtowers alone, in fur, the way kings were absolutely not supposed to travel. He had smelled lavender and beeswax on the wind, and honey warmed by a body, and something underneath all of it that made his wolf sit up inside his chest like a hound hearing its name. He had followed the scent for 3 miles, purely for security reasons, and now here he was, being used as a wall. He had planned to stay 1 night in these woods. He was wrong about that. He was wrong about nearly everything that came after. Wren peered up at him through the rain with round brown eyes and no fear at all, which was its own kind of madness, because he was the size of a plough horse and his eyes burned amber like banked coals. She said, "You're bleeding, you great idiot." I was, in fact, bleeding. A silver-tipped snare had caught his foreleg 2 ridges back, and he had gnawed himself free with the patience of a king and the temper of a wolf, and the cut had opened again on the run. He had intended to ignore it until it apologized. "Come on, then." She hefted her basket. "My cottage is past the dead mill. I've got yarrow salve and half a rabbit stew, and no sense whatsoever, apparently, because I'm inviting a wolf the size of a hay cart to dinner." She walked, and Alaric Thornmore, who had made 3 chieftains kneel before breakfast last Tuesday, followed her through the rain like a stray. Her cottage sat where the pack lands frayed into wild country, a low stone thing with a roof gone green with moss, 4 beehives out front under little slate hoods she had built to keep the rain off the entrances, and a paddock holding a 3-legged goat, a blind sheep, and a raven in a willow cage who screamed thief at Alaric the moment he ducked through the door. "That's magistrate," Wren said. "Ignore him. He hates everyone with more legs than him. He's got one." The cottage smelled of tallow and lavender, and wood smoke, and drying rose hips strung along the rafters, and there was a dent worn into the floorboards by the hearth exactly the size of a sitting body, because Wren Hartley, Alaric would learn, sat on the floor with her animals instead of in her 1 chair, which was reserved for the sheep on cold nights. She knelt in front of him with a clay pot of salve, and took his massive paw in both her hands, and every muscle in the Alpha King's body went still. No one touched him. That was not self-pity. It was protocol. Guards did not touch the king. Servants did not touch the king. The last person to hold Alaric Thornmore's hand had been his mother, dead 19 winters, and here was a plump Omega with honey on her wrists and rain in her eyelashes, folding his paw against her stomach so she could see the cut in the firelight, humming off key while she worked. "There," she said, "yarrow and honey. You'll want to lick it off. Don't." It's my last pot, and you look like the type. She fed him rabbit stew from her own bowl, first blowing on each spoonful, as if a wolf who could crack a bull's spine needed protection from soup. She refilled it twice, and gave him the bread she had clearly been saving for herself, and when she thought he wasn't looking, she pressed her own stomach with one hand, like a woman doing quiet arithmetic about how much food was left in the world. She was thin in the cupboards and soft everywhere else, and Alaric found, to his enormous irritation, that he wanted to bite the entire pack that had let this happen, because he could smell the story on the cottage, even before she told it to the fire that night. Talking to him the way lonely people talk to animals. Her pack had not cast her out. Casting out would have required them to notice her. Instead, when her healer mother died, they had simply stopped sending for Wren. The summons for lambing season went to a younger woman with a thinner waist and a louder father. The winter grain list was posted in the square, and her name was not on it. And when she asked, the quartermaster said, "Oh, an oversight," and it was an oversight the next year, too. Then one spring, she found the boundary stones had been moved 40 paces, quietly, in the night, so that her cottage stood outside packlands, and her hive sat on ground that no longer belonged to anyone. No one had ever said a cruel word to her face. They had just closed, slowly, like a door with a hand pretending not to push it. "So now I heal whatever limps up the path," she told the wolf, scratching the exact spot behind his ear that made his hind leg twitch, which he would deny under oath. "Goats, ravens, absolute units like you. It's not a bad life, it's just a quiet one." She fell asleep sitting up against his flank, mid-sentence, her cheek on his shoulder, one hand still buried in his fur. "Leave," Alaric told himself. "You are a king. The watchtowers, the council, the treaty with the river packs. Stand up, and she will slide gently to the floor, and you will leave." He lay there until dawn, holding still as a mountain so she wouldn't wake, listening to the rain on the moss roof and the small furnace sound of her breathing. And his wolf said, with the smugness of a creature who has already won, "We live here now." He left at first light. He came back the next night. And that was when the alpha king of the 6 packs began living a double life so ridiculous that his beta would eventually threaten to write it down. It started with the shawl. Wren had a grey wool shawl, mended at one corner with mismatched blue thread, that smelled overwhelmingly of her, and she left it on the paddock fence one afternoon, and when she came back it was gone. She blamed the wind. The wind was innocent. The shawl was in the royal den at Blackridge Keep, and the Alpha King was sleeping on it. "Sire," said his beta, Torin, a lean, grey-haired man with the permanently unsurprised face of someone who had served this family for 30 years. "There is a woman's shawl in your bed." "It was seized," Alaric said, not looking up from his maps. "As evidence." "Evidence of what, sire?" "Ongoing matters. It smells of lavender, sire." "Then the matters are ongoing and lavender-scented. You're dismissed." Next it was the gifts. Because a wolf who has decided a person is his cannot stop himself from providing. And the wolf did not consult the king about appropriate scale. Wren stepped outside one frost-bright morning to find an entire red deer stag laid across her doorstep like a delivery, dressed and drained, easily 200 pounds of winter meat, and the black wolf sitting beside it, with his ears up and his tail sweeping the frost, radiating the energy of a creature awaiting applause. "I'm one person," Wren said faintly. "Who's going to eat all this, you enormous lunatic?" "You are," the wolf's expression said. "All of it. Immediately. Get bigger. After that, came stranger offerings as the wolf grew ambitious. A trout still flapping. A perfect wheel of hard cheese with a knight's dagger stuck in it, which raised questions. And one memorable morning, a single boot of exceptional quality. Gleaming black leather with a silver buckle, which happened to belong to Councillor Vesic of the High Council, and which happened to have vanished from outside the councillor's chamber door at Blackridge Keep during the night, and the entire keep was turned upside down, looking for a thief, while the king stood at the window with his hands behind his back, saying, "Troubling, double the guard," in the voice of a man whose mouth still faintly tasted of buckle. "Sire," Torrin said that evening, very quietly, Councillor Vesic's boot was found 40 miles east, at a cottage past the old mill, in a raven's paddock. The raven has claimed it. The raven bit 2 men. "Nature is mysterious," said the king. "Sire, the huntsmen also report an unusually large black wolf has been seen crossing the East Ridge at night. They are asking permission to track it." Alaric turned around slowly. "Denied," he said. "That wolf is under royal protection." "Which wolf, sire?" "All wolves," said the Alpha King, with tremendous dignity, and swept out of the room. And Tord and Torrin looked at the ceiling for a long moment, and asked it for strength. The third escalation was the bath, and it was an accident, which is what Alaric told himself with such force that he nearly believed it. He arrived at the cottage on a warm evening to find the tin tub dragged out behind the house, screened by the willow, steam rising off it, and Wren already in it up to her chin, with her hair pinned high, scrubbing honey and goat liniment off her arms and singing to herself, badly, a song about a sailor who married the sea. "Turn around," the king inside him said. "Turn around this instant. We are a monarch." The wolf trotted straight over and stuck his entire head under her arm. Wren shrieked, laughed, and lost the soap. "You absolute menace! This is a private bath. Get out! No, don't you dare! Don't you dare!" He shook, fully, deeply, from ears to tail, and a wall of bathwater and wolf spray went over her, and she went under with a howl of outrage, and came up spluttering and slapped a wave at him, and the great black terror of the northern woods bounced sideways like a puppy, front legs flat, rump in the air, and got soaped for his crimes. She washed him. She actually washed him, dumped a bucket over his head, and scrubbed lavender soap into the fur of the Alpha King's neck with both hands, while he sat in the mud with his eyes half closed and his soul quietly leaving through the top of his skull. And afterward, she dried him by the fire with her second best blanket, and told him he smelled like a respectable animal for once, and Alaric Thornmore did not attend court for 2 days. "Fever," Torrin told the council smoothly. "His Majesty is indisposed." Then inevitably, the bed. It happened during the first true snow. Wren's fire burned low, and the cottage went cold enough that the blind sheep got the chair, and the goat got the hearth, and Wren burrowed under her quilts in the box bed, shivering, and there came a sound of a very large body clearing its throat at the door, if wolves can be said to clear their throats, and then 240 pounds of black wolf climbed onto the bed with the delicacy of a landslide. The bed frame screamed. The frame held, barely. Wren found herself wrapped in a curve of living furnace, her back against his chest, his tail flipped over her cold feet, his breath stirring her hair. Warm as August. "Absolutely not," the king said. "Get down. This is beyond all. This is." She is very warm. This is a heat conservation measure. Soldiers do this in the mountains. This is survival. I blame the snow. "You blamed the sky last time," said his wolf. "The sky and I have a complicated relationship," said the king, and went to sleep with his nose in her hair. He nearly got caught at winter's end. He had taken to leaving before dawn, shifting back to a man in the tree line, where he kept clothes in an oilskin bag in a hollow oak like a common poacher. And one grey morning Wren woke early to check a hive that had gone quiet, and came around the willow just as the wolf slipped into the trees, and she saw, or half saw through the branches, the shape of the wolf rise and stretch upward, taller, wrong, and she blinked snow off her lashes, and there was a broad-shouldered man in a dark cloak standing where the wolf had been. Her heart slammed. Then the man turned, lifted a hand in a stranger's polite wave, and called, "Your wolf went east, mistress. Big fellow. Nearly took my leg off," in a mangled border accent, and walked away fast, and Wren stood there, with her hand pressed to her chest, and decided her eyes were liars before breakfast. In the tree line, the Alpha King leaned against the oak, breathing like a man who had fallen off a cliff and caught a root. That spring, everything turned. It stopped being funny, somewhere between the bath and the bed, and became something with weight. And Alaric knew the exact night it happened. Wren had gone to the Pack village to trade honey for salt, and come back with her jars unsold, and her mouth held very carefully straight, the way she held it when something had teeth in it. She built up the fire. She fed the goat. She sat down on the floor against the wolf's side, and she was quiet for a long time. And then she told him what she would never have told a single living person, because he was a wolf, and wolves keep secrets like the ground keeps rain. "They posted the spring rolls today," she said. "The Pack census. Everyone's name, every family. They read them out in the square." Her fingers moved slowly through his fur. I stood there and listened to the whole thing. 211 names. I counted. She laughed. One small note, not a laugh at all. I don't know why I counted. I knew mine wouldn't be there. It hasn't been there for 6 years. I just keep going back and counting, like a fool checking an empty cupboard. The wolf lay very still. Inside him, the king was memorizing names of quartermasters. "Here's the stupid part," Wren went on, softer. "I'm not even sad about them anymore. You want to know what I'm actually sad about? You'll laugh. Well, you won't. You're a wolf. You'll just look noble and shed on me." She pulled his ear gently. "I met a man this winter. Once. At the solstice market in Dunhollow. Just for a moment, he bought my last 3 jars of honey and overpaid so badly I chased him down the street to give change, and he looked at me like, I don't know, like I was on the list, like I'd always been on the list." She shook her head. "Tall, ridiculous shoulders. Eyes like yours, actually, that same amber, isn't that funny? And I've thought about him every day, since like an absolute idiot, a man I talked to for 2 minutes, a man so far above me. He probably had servants to carry the honey. And I can't tell anyone that, because it's pathetic. So I'm telling you." She pressed her face briefly into his neck. "You're the only one I tell anything, you know that. You're my whole list, dog, one name." The wolf did not move. The wolf did not breathe, because Alaric remembered Dunhollow. He had gone to the solstice market, hooded and plain-clothed, hunting rumors of silver snares being sold, and a round, soft woman with honey jars had chased him down a frozen street, actually chased him, shouting, "Your change, sir," and pressed coins into his palm with cold fingers, and he had walked back to the keep, having forgotten entirely what he came for. She had been thinking of him. The man, not the wolf. Him. He got up, walked outside into the dark, put his nose to the sky, and howled once, full and unguarded. A sound that made lamps come on in the village 6 miles off, and made 2 sentries at Black Ridge. Keep swear the mountain itself had a heart. And then he trotted back inside and laid his head in her lap, and Wren said, "What on earth got into you?" and never knew she was petting the answer. Which is when Physician Doran arrived and ruined everything. He came up the cottage path on a bay mare in the last week of spring, a sleek, well-fed man of 40 with soft hands and a soft voice, the new pack physician from Dunhollow. And he came, he said, because word had spread of the hedge healer past the mill, whose salves worked better than his tinctures, and he wanted to see her methods, and possibly, he said over the following weeks, with increasing warmth and increasingly frequent visits, to offer her a post, an assistant's rooms in Dunhollow, a wage, a name on a roll. And then, on his 5th visit, in the paddock, with honeybees drifting between them, to offer her rather more than a post. "You're wasted out here, Mistress Hartley," Doran said, taking her honey-stained hand in his 2 smooth ones. "A woman of your gifts, your warmth. Come to Dunhollow, as my colleague, or if you'd permit me to hope, as something dearer." How was kind. That was the terrible part. He was genuinely kind, and the offer was genuinely good. And Wren stood in her own paddock, feeling the first hand that had held hers in 6 years, and behind the willow, unseen, a black wolf watched with eyes gone from amber to something like a forge, and the fence post nearest the trees quietly acquired 4 deep parallel gouges. The king held the wolf back. Barely. It took everything, but the king had no such handler for himself. And 2 days later, in human form, at court, Alaric Thorne Moore lost control for the first time in his adult life. It was a small thing that did it. The council was seated, 12 grey heads around the long table, and Councillor Vesic, oldest and driest of them, was working through the Eastern Provisioning Report, and he said, in passing, in a voice like a ledger, "There's also the small matter of the unlicensed healer beyond the mill-reach boundary. The hedge woman. Physician Doran has petitioned to absorb her practice under his license, and frankly the simplest course is to approve it and relocate the woman to Dunhollow, into his household, and be done with the irregularity." Into his household. The quill in the king's hand snapped. Not dramatically. Just a small, dry crack, and then a silence. Because every wolf in that room had felt the temperature change, had felt the sudden pressure roll off the head of the table. Like heat off a shield wall, the alpha dominance of 6-packs concentrated and unsheathed, and 12 councillors found themselves staring at the wood grain in front of them, with their necks bowed and no memory of deciding to bow them. "The petition is denied," said the king, very quietly. "Sire," Vesic managed, "it's an administrative—" "Denied." Alaric stood. "The mill-reach healer is under Crown protection. Her lands are under Crown protection. Her hives, her animals, her fence posts," a beat, "are under Crown protection. Any man with further opinions about her household may bring them to me personally, in the training yard. Good day." I was gone before the door finished swinging. Torin gathered his papers, looked around the shocked table, and said mildly, "His Majesty feels strongly about beekeeping," and followed. But Vesic sat very still, and his old eyes had gone narrow, because Vesic had spent 50 years watching Thornmoor kings, and he knew what he had just seen. A mate response. an undeclared, unapproved, politically catastrophic mate response, aimed at a packless hedge omega, when the council had spent 2 years arranging the king's match to Lady Maren of the River Pax to seal the water treaty. And Vesic, who had also never forgotten that the wolf under royal protection had stolen his boot, began quietly to make arrangements of his own. The old man told himself it was for the realm. That night he sat alone and took out a small carved wooden sparrow. Crude work, a boy's work, made 60 years ago by a low-born lad. Vesic's own father had driven off the land for looking at Vesic's sister, and he turned it over in his dry fingers, the way he had 10,000 times, and he thought, love below one's station drowns the whole house. I saved her then, and I'll save the crown now. And he put the sparrow away, and sent for the huntsman the king had refused. Silver arrows, the East Ridge, the big black wolf. A bounty, paid privately, no crest on the coin. The storm broke on a night that started with rain. Because of course it did. Wren was walking home from Dunhollow in a downpour, having told Physician Doran no gently, finally, no to the post and no to the household, and no to the something dearer. Because she had realized somewhere on his doorstep, with her mouth already open, you could not marry one man, while your heart kept a den for something else, even if the something else was half memory and half animal, and all impossible. She was 3 miles from home, soaked through, oddly light when she heard the horses. 4 huntsmen, off the ridge trail, crossbows up, and a voice, "There, by the woman, there." And she turned, and the black wolf was coming out of the tree line toward her, the way he always came when it rained, and she understood 1 heartbeat too late that the crossbows were not for her. "No!" she screamed, and threw herself in front of 240 pounds of moving wolf, which should have ended her, except that the wolf did the impossible and stopped, and the first silver quarrel meant for his heart went through the meat of his shoulder instead, as he twisted to shield her, and the second was in the air, and there was no angle, no time, nothing. A wolf's body could do that would put him between her and it. But a man's body could. The wolf rose. In the rain in front of her, the black shape surged upward and unfolded, fur to skin, the terrible fluid wrongness she had half seen through winter branches, and Alaric Thorne Moore stood over her in the downpour, arms spread, and took the second quarrel through the same shoulder, and did not fall, and did not stop, and his voice came out of him, like the mountain speaking. Down, 4 huntsmen and 4 horses hit the mud as one. Alpha command, full force, unmastered by any wolf alive. The rain hammered down on all of it. Wren sat in the mud, looking up at him. The rain ran through his dark hair and off his ridiculous shoulders, and around the arrow standing in his flesh, and his eyes were amber. That same amber. Banked coals, the wolf's eyes, the honey buyer's eyes, and her whole winter reassembled itself in her head with a sound like ice going off a roof. "You," she said. "Wren, the stew." Her voice was climbing. "The bath. I bathed you. I scrubbed you. I dried you with my mother's blanket. I slept. We. 6 months. You are the king. You're the actual king." I fed the king of the 6-packs table scraps and told him he smelled respectable. "You should get out of the rain," he said, absurdly, and reached for her, and she slapped his hand away and stood up under her own power, mud to the elbows, and the look on her face hurt him worse than the silver did. "The shawl," she said, "the blue mended shawl, That was you. Yes, the stag. Yes, the boot, the councillor's boot, that was in every crier's report for a month. There was a reward. I have formed strong opinions about Councillor Vesic, said the king. I told you things. And there it was, the real wound, arriving in her voice and cracking it. I told the wolf everything, every pathetic thing I never said out loud to a living soul, the census, the counting, the oh no, oh no. Her hands came up over her face. The market, the man from the market. I told you about you, to your face. You lay there with your head in my lap, and let me confess to you about you. And you said nothing. You howled. I remember you howled. Was that funny? Was I funny? Wren, no, don't. She stepped back from him, and it was the first time in 6 months she had ever moved away from that body in the rain, and both of them felt it like a snapped bone. Everyone I've ever known just quietly decided I wasn't worth telling the truth to. The pack, the rolls, the stones in the night. Nobody ever lied loud. They all lied quiet. And you, her breath hitched, you were the one true thing. You were my whole list, and you were a lie the entire time. I was never, he started and stopped, because there was an arrow in him and a king's vocabulary in him, and neither was any use. And what came out instead, hoarse, was the plain truth. The first night, I told myself I stayed because of the rain. I blamed the sky. I have been blaming the sky for 6 months, Wren. It was never the sky. She looked at him for a long, long moment, rain streaming off both of them, huntsmen still face down in the mud around them like scattered firewood. Go home, Your Majesty, she said, and walked away. He let her. It was the hardest act of his reign. But that night, when Wren finally cried herself hollow and looked out her window at the flooding dark, there was a shape in the paddock. The black wolf sat in the open, in the worst of the storm, arrow wound, bound in what she would later learn was a strip of royal banner, making no sound, asking for nothing, just keeping the watch he had kept all winter. And he was there at dawn, and there the next night, and the next, soaked and patient and huge. And on the third night, Wren stood at her door for a full minute, and then said, disgusted with herself, "Oh, for you'll die of chill, and then I'll have killed the king. Get in, you stupid, stupid animal," and held the door, and he came in low and careful, and lay down in the old dent by the hearth, and she threw her second-best blanket over him harder than strictly necessary, and they began in silence, in fur, in the only language that had never lied between them, to mend. The reckoning came at the summer gathering, when all 6 packs met on the assembly plain, below Blackridge Keep, 1,000 strong, and Councillor Vesic rose before them all to formally present Lady Maren of the River Packs and press the match, and it was Maren herself who broke it. She was a tall, cool blade of a woman, and she had come prepared to be queen, and she stood up before 6 packs and did the one thing no one expected. Before this proceeds, Lady Maren said clearly, the assembly should know that Councillor Vesic hired huntsmen with silver against a royal order, and that the wolf they shot on the East Ridge in the spring rain was the king. She met Vesic's stunned eyes without heat. I found the payment ledger. I was going to burn it, Councillor. I want you to know I considered it. A pause, and something old moved across her face. But I won't be the second woman in your life who was saved from love for her own good. I've heard how the first one turned out. The plain went silent as deep water. Vesic stood very still, and his hand, out of sight in his sleeve, closed around a small wooden sparrow, and he did not deny any of it. Judgment was swift, exile to the far coast, name struck from the rolls, and there was a moment, as the old man was led out, when he paused level with the king, and said quietly, "The boot, at least, sire. I would like an explanation for the boot." And Alaric said, "No." And that was that. Then the Alpha King stepped to the front of the stone and looked out over 6 packs, and beside the platform, in a plain green dress with honey still under her fingernails, because some things do not change for royalty, stood Wren Hartley, who had been summoned by royal letter and had almost fed the letter to the goat. "There is a woman," said Alaric Thornmore, and his voice carried to the last rank of the last pack, whose name was left off her pack's rolls for 6 years. I am told this was an oversight. The temperature of his voice made the front rows lean back. "Hear me. Her name is Wren Hartley. She fed a wounded wolf her last bread. She has healed more of the north than any licensed hall. She is my mate, chosen by my wolf before my crown had any say. And my wolf has better judgment than my crown. And she is mine. And from this day, her name stands first on the rolls of all 6 packs, above mine, and any pack, any council, any quartermaster who leaves it off a list again may explain the oversight to me personally." He came down from the stone through the roar and stood in front of her, and all the power of him folded up quiet. And he said, only to her, "You told the wolf once that he was your whole list. One name." He held out his hand, palm up, the way she had once held out change on a frozen street. "I'm asking to be on yours the honest way, as the man. You can still say no. You're the only creature alive who can." Wren looked at his open hand. 6 packs held their breath. "You owe me a shawl," she said, "a pot of yarrow salve, and 1 entire deer's worth of smoked venison that I had to build a 2nd rack for." "Done. And magistrate keeps the boot." "The raven keeps the boot," agreed the Alpha King solemnly, and Wren Hartley put her hand in his, and the plane came apart with sound. The mating mark, when it came under the willow behind the cottage, not in any keep, because she asked for that, and he would have given her the moon on a plate. And she did become Luna of the 6 packs, and the winter grain lists of every village were thereafter read aloud twice, by law, which the packs called the Luna's Rule, and physician Doran, decent to the end, sent a wedding gift of tinctures and a note that said only, "I did wonder about the fence post." But the ending, the real ending, was smaller than all of that. It was an evening in the following spring, at the cottage, which they kept, because queens need somewhere the crown cannot follow. Rain came up out of the south, sudden and warm, while Wren was closing up the hives, and out of pure ancient habit, 240 pounds of black wolf appeared at a dead run and slotted himself between her and the weather, broadside to the wind, exactly as he had the very first day. Wren looked at the wall of wet black fur. Then she ducked under his chin, walked out from behind him into the open, and stood in the rain with her face turned up and her arms out, letting it soak her to the skin, laughing. The wolf stared. This violated everything. "Come on," she called. "You're allowed to just be rained on, you know. You don't have to blame the sky anymore." He came. Slowly, like a king abdicating, he stepped out from under the willow and stood beside her instead of in front of her, and the warm rain drummed on them both equally, and she leaned into his shoulder and he leaned back. Careful, always careful, and later, inside, with the fire snapping and the blind sheep in the chair, and magistrate asleep with one foot in a boot, the great black wolf laid his head in her lap, in the worn dent by the hearth, and Wren dipped her finger in the last pot of honey, and held it out, and he took it with enormous gravity, and she counted his heartbeats under her palm, the way she had once counted names in a square, slow and steady, and hers, while the rain went on falling on the moss roof over both of them all night long.